The NaviTrack II cable pipe and sonde locator is a critical part of any successful pipe and cable locate. You can use NaviTrack to pinpoint remote transmitters or sondes, like the one in your SeeSnake camera system, and trace buried lines. In the next few minutes, we'll show you how to set up your receiver and use its features to locate remote transmitters and trace buried lines. The receiver operates on 4 C-size batteries. To install the batteries, locate the battery compartment on the bottom of the receiver and turn the locking knob a quarter turn to release the battery holder. Install the batteries with the correct polarity, as shown on the label inside the battery holder. You can use either alkaline or rechargeable batteries, but to prevent damage to the receiver, never mix rechargeable and standard batteries. When you've loaded the batteries, slide the holder back into the receiver and turn the locking knob a quarter turn to secure it. The batteries are installed, so let's power it up and take a look. The power button is located on the bottom right side of the keypad. We'll hit it, and after a few seconds the operating screen will come up, rigid, and we'll be ready to go. There's a lot of information on the screen, so let's start with the basics. The display has 2 main regions, the area outside the circle and the area inside the circle. The area inside the circle is called the active view area, and it's used to display visual elements as well as operating menus. Outside the circle, we'll find indicator icons and numeric readouts. We'll cover most of the display items in later segments, so for right now, let's just look at the operating mode and frequency indicators on the left side of the display. The icon tells us we're in the sonde operating mode, and the number under it tells us the receiver is set to 512 Hz. If this isn't the frequency or operating mode we want, we can switch to another one by pressing the frequency key. Every time we hit the key, it'll go to the next frequency until we get back to where we started. The receiver ships with 1 sonde frequency and 2 line trace frequencies enabled. If you want to enable more frequencies, or disable any of the default ones, you'll need to open the settings menu. You'll do that by hitting the menu key, which is right above the power key. So let's hit the menu key and open it up. The menu opens to whatever frequency you've got selected. In this case, 512 Hz sonde mode. We can tell it's a sonde frequency because of the icon next to it. There's also a box next to it. The box is checked, which tells us that this frequency is enabled. To disable this frequency, just hit the select key to uncheck the box. To enable the frequency, just hit the select key again. That's it. The receiver ships with just 1 sonde frequency available, but you can add other frequencies to this menu, and we'll show you how to do that a bit later. Since we're already here, let's take a look at the rest of the menu. Use the down key to scroll down to the active trace frequencies. These frequencies are designated by an active trace icon and are for use with lines that have been energized with the transmitter or line illuminator. If we go down a bit farther, we'll come to the passive power trace frequency for tracing 50 or 60 Hz power line signals. At the bottom of the menu, you'll find some tool settings. The first item lets us switch the depth measurement between feet and meters. Just press the select key to switch back and forth. The next item controls how the LCD's backlight works. It's on automatic right now, which works well most of the time. You can also turn it on all the time or off all the time to save your batteries. And here's a quick tip about the auto backlight feature. The auto backlight sensor is located at the top of the keypad. If you cover it up, you can sometimes trick the backlight into coming on. This is the easy way to get the backlight to turn on if you just need it for a few seconds. The next item on the menu lets us change the display's contrast. Just press the select key, then use the up and down keys until the display looks the way you want it. When you're done, press the menu key to get back to the main menu. The receiver has some advanced display features, and the next item down lets us turn them on and off. The first time we press the select key, we'll get to a submenu with 2 choices, sonde or line. Sonde is already highlighted, so let's press the select key to open up the control. There are several different display elements here, and all of them are covered in the manual. So for right now, we're just going to show you how to turn them on and off. To choose a display element, press the up or down keys until it's highlighted. To turn it on or off, press the select key to check or uncheck its box. We're done here, so we'll press the menu key until we get back to the main menu. A few minutes ago, we told you that you could add or remove frequencies from the main menu. The next item down is where you can do that. Let's open it up and have a look. The top item has a sonde icon in it, and the next item down has an active line trace icon. We'll scroll down and highlight the active line trace icon, then hit the select key. This takes us to a submenu that contains all the active line trace frequencies that are programmed into the receiver. If there's a check mark next to a frequency, that frequency will be available in the main menu. But if it's unchecked, the frequency will not be available. 33 kHz is checked, so let's uncheck it and see what happens. We'll go back to the main menu and scroll up to the active line trace frequencies. As you can see, 33 kHz is now gone from the main menu. And if it's not in the main menu, it won't be available when you hit the frequency key either. If we want it back, we'll need to go back into the submenu and turn it on again. This feature lets you unclutter the main menu by getting rid of frequencies you never use, and it's great if you know how to use it. So now if you loan your receiver out and it comes back missing some frequencies, you'll know how to put them back. The last menu item contains a screen with information about your receiver, and a menu item that lets you restore your receiver to its factory default settings. Select the check icon to restore those settings, or the X icon to close the menu without making any changes. That's about it for the settings menu, so press the menu key and you'll end up back at the operating screen. There's one more key we want to look at here, and that's the volume control key. You use the volume control key to adjust the sound level coming out of the speaker. The key works two ways. You can press it repeatedly to cycle up through the sound levels, or you can press it once to open the sound level menu, then use the up or down keys to change the sound level. Like all menus, it will close on its own, or you can press the select key to close it immediately. NaviTrack II makes it easy to get a precise markout on a remote transmitter or sonde, and in this segment, we'll show you how to pinpoint a sonde's position quickly and accurately. The sonde will be locating as part of a SeeSnake video pipe inspection system. The sonde is located inside the spring right behind the camera head and operates at 512 Hz. We've put the camera into a drain line that tees into another line after about 8 feet. We've pushed the camera just past the tee, which in these conditions should be well within range of the transmitter's signal. We've activated the transmitter and made sure the receiver is set to 512 Hz sonde mode. We've marked the sonde's location and positioned ourselves directly over it, so let's have a look at the receiver's display. Outside the active view area, starting at the top, we have the signal strength, frequency and operating mode, depth readout, and battery status indicator. Let's take a closer look. The signal strength is pretty straightforward. The number will be highest when you're directly over a sonde and will decrease as you move away. The signal reading isn't affected by the receiver's orientation to the signal and will remain constant even if we rotate the receiver. Also, there are no nulls and no false peaks associated with NaviTrack's signal strength reading, which means the signal will increase smoothly as you approach the sonde and decrease smoothly as you move away. You've already seen the frequency and operating mode indicators, so we'll skip down to the depth readout at the bottom left of the display. The depth updates continuously as you locate, and will be lowest when you're directly over a sonde. The most important thing to remember about the depth reading is that the receiver is actually measuring distance, not depth. The reading only reflects the depth of the target signal when you're directly over it, with the receiver vertical and the bottom antenna ball resting on the ground. At the bottom right of the display is the battery life indicator. If the indicator is completely filled in, your batteries are full. If it's empty, it's time to change them. There's one more item we want to cover here, and that's the audio. The audio tone reflects what's happening with the signal. When you move away from the signal, the audio pitch decreases. When you move towards the signal, the audio pitch increases. If the pitch is at either end of its range, you can reset it to the center of its range at any time just by pressing the select key. Now let's take a look inside the active view area. The map uses icons to represent the position of targets underground. There are two types of targets: poles, which occur at each end of the sonde, and the equator, a plane or imaginary line that passes through the center of the sonde and stretches out on both sides of the sonde until it is so weak the receiver can no longer see it. When the sonde is lying flat or horizontal, and the ground above is also flat, the equator will be located halfway between the poles. And if you draw a line between the poles, you'll find the sonde where that line and the equator intersect. The receiver's display uses icons to represent the position of the poles and the equator. We can map these points by targeting their icons on the display. Now that you're familiar with the receiver's interface, let's locate our sonde. We're going to give you two basic techniques and a couple of variations, but everything we're going to show you can be boiled down to just 3 steps. Localize the sonde, pinpoint its position, and verify your results. The first method we're going to demonstrate uses just the signal strength portion of the display. We're showing you this method first because it's easiest to learn, and because it's the most reliable. It works with all sondes, in all circumstances, regardless of whether the sonde is horizontal or tilted. We'll start by localizing the sonde. To do this, we'll get a fix on its general direction so we can get close to it. Then once we're close to it, we'll further localize its location. To find the transmitter's general direction, we'll extend the receiver and sweep it slowly in an arc. Keep an eye on the signal reading. When it's highest, the receiver's mast will be pointed towards the transmitter. We have the general direction, so we'll lower the receiver to its normal operating position and start walking toward the transmitter. As we get closer, the signal will increase. When the signal drops off, it means we've moved past the sonde, so we'll back up to where the signal was highest. From here, we'll further localize the sonde. We know it's not in front of us or behind us, so we'll search to either side. The key here is to keep going until the signal drops off significantly, then go back to where it was highest. We've localized the sonde, so now we'll use smaller, slower movements to pinpoint its position. Slight variations in height can cause significant changes in the signal reading, so we'll keep the receiver at a constant height. We think we found the sonde, so we'll verify our results by making sure that movement in any direction causes the signal to decrease. To accurately measure the sonde's depth, make sure the antenna ball is resting on the ground. In this method, we'll make full use of the receiver's mapping capabilities. We'll start out as before by using the signal strength to find the sonde's general direction and get close. But this time, we'll keep an eye on the active view area as we approach the sonde. When we pick up a pole, we'll move toward it and center it on the crosshairs. When we've got it, we'll place a marker chip on the ground to designate its position. After we get our first pole, we'll see a double line on the display. This line tells us how the transmitter is lying underground, and in most cases also represents the pipe's approximate direction. The equator lies between the two poles, and we'll pass over it on our way to the second pole. We'll find the second pole and mark its position. At this point, we've localized the sonde to a position that is somewhere between the two poles and directly in line with them. To pinpoint its position, we'll line the receiver up between the poles and head back to the equator. We'll center the equator on the display and mark its position. As a final check, we'll make sure the signal drops off when we move the receiver in any direction away from this point. In the method we just demonstrated, we found the poles first and then the equator. In some situations, it might be easier to find the equator first and then the poles, and we'll show you how to do that. We'll find the transmitter's direction just as we did before. But this time, rather than locating a pole first, we'll pick up the equator and follow it to the sonde. As we approach the sonde, the signal will increase. When we move past it, the signal will decrease, so we'll back up to where it's highest along the equator. We've used the equator to help guide us to the sonde and localize it, and from here we can finish our locate by marking the poles and equator and verifying the signal strength, just as we did before. You've seen how easy it is to locate a sonde that's lying flat in a pipe that's horizontal. But what if the sonde is tilted? For this demonstration, we'll simulate what the sonde signal might look like if the sonde were in a non-horizontal portion of pipe. We'll attach a SeeSnake battery sonde to a length of PVC pipe and insert it into our drain line. Once the sonde is in position, we'll rotate the PVC pipe so that the sonde is tilted approximately 45 degrees from horizontal. If you know your sonde is tilted, your best bet is to locate it using just the signal strength as we demonstrated in our first example. But let's assume that you don't know the sonde is tilted and locate it using the map. We'll find and mark the second pole, and then begin moving towards the first pole. Keep a close eye on the signal strength. Notice that it keeps increasing after we pass the equator. This is a good indicator that the sonde is tilted. We'll go ahead and mark our second pole, because we can still use the poles to help localize the sonde. But when we're pinpointing the sonde's position, we need to rely on signal strength and not the equator. The NaviTrack II receiver helps make line tracing fast and efficient. And in this segment, we'll show you the features related to line tracing and how to use them. We've applied an 8 kHz signal to the tracing wire for a gas line. Our technician has positioned himself directly over the utility, and we've marked the ground to indicate the line's position. His receiver's on, and it's set to 8 kHz, so let's see what his display looks like. Outside the active view area, starting at the top, we have the proximity signal number. The proximity signal looks and acts like the signal strength or peak signal you may be used to on conventional line locating receivers, but is based on a different measurement. What you need to know is that you'll use it the same as you would signal strength, but in most cases, it will give you a truer indication of the target signal's position than signal strength would. Using the proximity signal is pretty straightforward. When you're directly over an undistorted signal, the number will be highest, and as you move away from the signal, the number will decrease. The proximity signal isn't affected by the receiver's orientation, so even as we rotate the receiver, the signal stays fairly constant. Let's take a look at the depth readout at the bottom of the display. Just as with sonde locating, the depth updates automatically as you work. It will be lowest when you're directly over an undistorted signal, and will increase as you move away from the signal. And just as with sonde locating, the reading only reflects the depth of the target signal when you're directly over it. The receiver is vertical, and the lower antenna ball is resting on the ground. Next, let's take a look inside the active view area. Just like with sonde locating, the crosshair in the center represents your position relative to the target signal. The other item inside the active view area is the tracing line. The tracing line has 3 important functions. It represents the location and the direction of the signal you're tracing. It reflects changes in the direction of the target utility, when the utility makes a turn, for example. And it helps you recognize signal distortion. Let's see the tracing line in action. When we're directly over an undistorted signal, the tracing line will be centered on the display, like you see here. If we move the receiver to the left, the tracing line moves right, because the target utility is now on our right. If we move right, the tracing line will move to the left. And here's another thing. Because NaviTrack II uses omnidirectional antennas, the tracing line will stay aligned with the signal, regardless of the receiver's orientation. And that's true whether we're directly over the signal or off to one side. The tracing line operates independently from the proximity signal and is based on an entirely different measurement. Because of this, we can compare the tracing line against the proximity signal to evaluate whether or not the signal is distorted. Here's how. When the proximity signal is highest, the tracing line should be centered on the crosshairs. In other words, if the tracing line is centered like it is here, and we move the receiver to either side of the target signal, the proximity signal should decrease. In this case, the tracing line is centered when the proximity signal is highest, and since both measurements are in agreement, we have a strong indication that we're dealing with a good, clean, undistorted signal. The receiver actually has two tracing lines, and we'll open up the settings menu and turn the second one on. Now we have two tracing lines, one solid and the other dashed. When you're directly over a signal that's not being distorted or interfered with, the tracing lines will be closely aligned with one another. But if something is interfering with the signal and distorting its shape, the dashed line could be significantly offset or skewed. Next, we'll turn on the proximity signal graph. The proximity signal graph lives in the circle surrounding the active view area and gives you a visual representation of the proximity signal, so it's easier to see small changes in the signal when you're fine-tuning your markout. The marker moves counterclockwise when the proximity signal decreases and clockwise when it increases. When the signal decreases, a watermark stays behind to give you a visual reference of where the reading was highest. Next, we'll turn on the signal strength readout. You'll find the signal strength readout at the bottom of the display. The signal strength reading is completely independent from the proximity signal and tracing lines, which means we can compare it to them to evaluate the signal for distortion. If the signal is not distorted, the signal strength should be highest when the proximity signal is highest and the tracing lines are centered, and it should decrease as we move away from the target signal, which it does. This gives us a third way of confirming that our signal is not distorted. The display has a few other elements, but we'll save those for the manual. Right now, let's see how the audio works. The audio tone reflects what's happening with the signal. When the signal decreases, the audio pitch decreases. When the signal increases, the audio pitch also increases. If the pitch is at either end of its range, you can reset it to the center of its range at any time just by pressing the select key. Now that you've seen the display elements, let's look at the basics of tracing a buried line. We'll be tracing a signal that we will apply to the tracing wire for a gas line with a NaviTrack 10-watt line transmitter. We'll start by driving the transmitter's ground stake as far into the soil as possible and connect one of the transmitter's leads to it. Then we'll connect the transmitter's other lead to the tracing wire for the gas line and work the lead's teeth into the wire to ensure we have a good connection. Once we're connected, we'll turn the power on and select a suitable frequency, in this case 8 kHz. The transmitter is beeping steadily, which indicates we have a good connection that's allowing plenty of signal onto the line. Now that our transmitter is set up, we'll turn our receiver on and select the frequency to match our transmitter. We'll put the solid tracing line roughly in the center of the display and start walking. After just a couple of feet, the tracing lines begin to rotate. This tells us the gas line is making a turn. We'll keep the tracing line roughly centered and let it lead us around the turn. We'll follow the target signal by keeping the tracing line roughly centered as we walk. Note that we're not swinging the receiver as we walk. Swinging the receiver is not necessary and is not recommended. You only need to move the receiver across the line when you stop to verify that the signal is clean and free from distortion, like you do before you mark the line's position. In the past few minutes, we've introduced you to the NaviTrack II cable pipe and sonde locator. We've showed you its major features, and we've taken a quick look at using it to locate sondes and trace buried lines. On behalf of everyone at RIDGID Coleman, we appreciate your business, and we thank you for watching this video.